Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about the LX9 swap. We're going to go over a couple of things, some notes real quick. I'm going to show you visually while the motor's on the stand what needs changed, and then we're going to show you actually changing it, putting it in the car, getting it buttoned up, and started finally. So before we go into the whole budget swap and details, I'll talk about the swap kit real quick, and that'll kind of set the stage for what needs addressed. First off, one thing that you're going to need no matter what is an external crank trigger. Inside the 3.5 on the crank, the trigger has a different number of notches in it. It's different than what our 3.4 is. So our computer is unable to read that and determine how to run the motor. Without that, the motor won't even start. Then you're going to get a throttle body adapter to either use your stock one, which is not recommended because now you've got this big opening, you're putting the small throttle body on. If you can find a TCE bigger one, go for it. Or the LX9 that we'll talk about here in a minute is a great budget cheap one to go with. You're going to get coil pack adapters. The 3.4 coil packs that you're going to use don't line up with where the upper manifold is, so these kind of make up for that. Pigtail adapter basically, so it's going to take the 3.4 plug and turn it into the 3.5 map sensor plug. Coolant temp sensor extension. The coolant sensor is actually in the rear head versus the lower intake manifold, so you need like 3 to 4 inches to make up for that. Oil level bypass. So some years came with an oil level sensor in the pan. 3.5s did not. So this is just a plug that goes on the end, loops itself, so you never get a light. You'll get a differential bracket, and the visuals will kind of help with this one a little more. And it's more for just the automatics. If you're doing a manual swap, you don't have to worry about it at all. You're gonna get an AC spacer that's modified to help with the holes being a little bit off. And then he sends a cam sensor for your specific year. First, let's talk about what you're looking for. So what you're gonna be looking for is a 3.5 liter, codenamed LX9, out of a 2004 to 2006 G6 Malibu and a Rendezvous. My suggestion is if you're gonna get one, try to get it fully dressed. It's not completely important, but it'll help those that aren't savvy with building motors swap things over when it comes time to putting the 3.4 and 3.5 next to each other and completing everything that needs to change over. As far as the why, I got a lot of my info off of grandamgt.com forum. There's a little bit on Alera mod, and then MilzyMotorsports actually did a pretty big write-up as to the whys, the hows, and everything, and obviously tries to sell his swap kit, which makes everything pretty much plug and play. But it comes with cost and a wait time. Basically, I'm gonna go over a budget swap, basically the cheapest way to go about it, so you're not breaking the bank trying to make this happen. It is a little more power, it's more reliability, and a little more efficiency with the improved intake setup. Apples to apples is a 3.4 is typically, in a GT is rated at 175 at the crank, and one of these 3.5s is rated at 201 horsepower at the crank. So right there, see a little difference. Once you get this in the car, you don't need a tune. The factory maps will run this motor, but it won't run it as efficient as it could. You could get mail-in tunes from, say, Milzy or Wot-Tech to make up for that and really make it run as efficient as it's supposed to. And even beyond that, a dyno tune is probably the most efficient way to go about it because each car is just a tad bit different. Some other pros that they come with. So you're going from a 56mm throttle body to a 65. All right, so from here, let's talk about the budget part of it. Thing off the bat, so like I mentioned before, an LX9 throttle body. So off a 99-02 Aurora or Intrigue. It's also a 3.5 liter, but it's a short star, and it was only an Oldsmobile motor. You're gonna get that throttle body. All the plugs are the same. You're gonna get a bunch of extra vacuums on it, and you're gonna need an adapter. Now Wot-Tech sells the adapter for that. It's about 50 bucks. You'll do gaskets or some RTV seal, and that'll get it bolted onto that upper manifold. Milzy also sells an adapter. I think it's about the same price and the same idea. you know, gaskets bolted on. So you're gonna want to grab the bracket while you're there too. And it's shaped different and bolts up different, and you're gonna have to get a little creative. I'm gonna put the link in the description for this write-up that I'm kind of going off of. You know, I'm taking pictures and making a video out of it, and you can see how Mike took two and made one bracket. The whole kit you can buy that gives you the throttle body, the bracket, the gaskets, and the adapter. So that's, you know, an option out there too. So next thing we're gonna have to adapt for is the map sensor. Snip off the pigtail that goes into the 3.5 sensor, and what you can do is cut and splice that onto your harness in the car and match the wires, because they are the same colored wires on both cars. Same with the coolant sensor. Snip some of the pigtail off of the engine harness with the 3.5 and then add it onto your 3.4 harness to make it for it, you know, moving from the lower intake over to the rear head. Coil packs or something else here, and basically what he did is take two and make one. Basically the lower portion bolts on like normal, the upper sits a little different. So if you take the 3.5 ignition module, do a little bit of cutting, bolt them together, you know, like I said, check out the write-up here and you'll see what I'm talking about. AC compressor with the spacer and then the diff bracket. Those are going to be a couple of things that need modified. I'll go more into detail once we get that taken care of on the car. I'll go ahead and try to bolt the AC compressor on the motor before we do the delete. Because if you do a delete, you just buy a 3.5, you know, accessory pulley and get rid of it. You know, there's no modifying there. And the diff bracket's just gonna have to be something I show you guys. Basically, that's all I kind of want to bring up here. Go look at the motor next, over the whole thing, what needs changed, and give you some visuals. Well, let's go out to the garage. So now it's time to go over the visuals. I'll give you a little look as to what you're gonna keep, what needs changed, while I have it on the stand here. And then we'll talk about it more when we go to install it. So again, this is just from the 3.4 to a 3.5. Right off the bat, my suggestion is utilizing your 3.4 timing cover. So a couple of things that it'll do is it'll already have your engine mount set up ready to go, and your crank sensor that goes behind the balancer ready to go. Swap that out. That'll bring your water pump over. Suggest changing it while you have this, you know, out. Use your 3.4 harmonic balancer, so that'll retain that crank sensor behind there. You're going to utilize all of your pulley drive from the 3.4. So all the 3.5 stuff's going to go. The idler pulleys, the AC compressor, and the alternator with that bracket, all going to come off. You'll reinstall your 3.4 alternator bracket with that alternator. Pulleys, your power steering pump, you know, your water pump already be installed. When we come over here to your AC compressor, take your 3.4 AC compressor and put the bolts in loosely and see if they'll work. If not, oblong the holes of the little spacer, and supposedly that should help. We're actually gonna delete it, so we're just gonna use a delete pulley that's for a 3.5. The belt will all fall in the same spot, so won't have to worry about anything there. You just install it basically. While we're over here, the key ingredient for this swap is our crank trigger. What this happens is this goes on the outside of your crank pulley, and we'll install this, you know, before we put this in the car. You're gonna take this bracket, and there's two bosses here on the block, all ready to go. Tighten those down with some Loctite too, and you're gonna take the crank sensor you would usually put in the back of the block and just install it here instead. So leave everything inside the block on the 3.5. Don't mess with anything. Just take that crank sensor, install it here, and then there's a bolt that you can tighten it down with. And what you'll see is we're gonna get it as close as we can without touching. Make sure that's gonna back out, and that'll get you up and running. Across the front here, what you're gonna find, as you see we're gonna do with the oil pump, you're gonna find this bracket, or this relocate, bolted on the block to move the filter down. That's just how it's set up in those bodies. So you just remove that, take the threads out of the end of this. You'll see like a little threaded piece, and that'll thread right in the block for you to thread your oil filter on. So that'll retain it back to where it's supposed to be. Something else too is you're gonna have to install your 3/4 oil pressure switch, which will go right there, and then the knock sensor, which will go right there, both from the 3/4. So that brings us to the manifolds. So you'll have to retain your 3/4 exhaust manifolds along with the crossover. The block is all the same shape, so you don't have to worry about anything being clearanced. It just uses a different shaped manifold. So there's a bracket that'll go from here to the trans, and then up here to the trans. These fall in a different spot. Go figure. I haven't 100% figured it out just yet. My 3.5 is a manual, and I got rid of the bracket years and years ago. We'll get that figured out and let you guys know. So moving up, like I said, don't mind that this is torn apart because we are installing different stuff. Like I said, heads you don't have to touch. Rockers you don't have to touch. The valve covers are the same. They have the same holes in it, so for both the rear evap tube and the front PCV, all the same. The coolant tube, you'll have to change that to the 3/4 one. It also falls in a different spot. As you see, it kind of comes up with this one. Ours goes straight back. And while we're on the topic, the one that comes out of the rear manifold, you'll also have to change to the 3/4. My suggestion, when you pull the 3/4 out, just unbolt that one from the block, pull it out of the manifold, and just set it aside and leave it in the car. You'll have to change the cam sensor to your year specific. Not a big deal. When you have the timing cover off, it's much easier to get to. You'll need to take your injectors and fuel rail from the 3/4. Suggestion again there, take the upper manifold off the 3/4. Take the injectors just as a whole. Take everything off the, pop those out of the lower manifold. Leave the fuel lines attached, just set it aside. It'll have some play to it. That'll save you buying some O-rings down the road. You may need to grind down the throat of the 3.5 upper here. We'll see with this one. Mine isn't ground down, some have to. The thermostat housing, you'll need to change to the 3.4. It's a slightly different angle. And then we don't need that extra vent tube there, or bypass tube. The reason for that is their overflow sits up in this area just behind the motor, where ours is on that side. You see right there, that is the coolant sensor for the 3.5. So it's actually in the head. What you'll need to do, cut some of this harness off here and extend what's on the 3.4. Okay, so right there is where the 3.4 one is. So you just need about 4 inches or so just to move that back to the head. Coil packs are different, so you'll need to utilize the 3.4 ones. However, so the lower will bolt the same way, the upper is different. So we're gonna go through what we saw on the website or the walkthrough, make 1 out of 2 here. So we'll update as that goes down. So the upper has less vacuums, so you may need to tee off of here. Now I say you may need to because when we come to our throttle body, as I showed you on the website real quick, if you go with the LX5, it has an abundance of vacuum ports. So both the fuel pressure regulator needs a vacuum source and your HVAC will need a vacuum source. And that's the only 2 things you need to worry about, because when we come to the map sensor, it's this little guy right here. So what you need to do, again, is just save some of the pigtail off the car or off the motor. Hopefully you get the harness with this thing. The wire colors are the same, so just cut and splice, and that makes it plug and play. Your booster line will fall right in the same spot, so that's not a big deal. And then for those of you worried about emissions, the evap solenoid here is the same plug as ours, so that's plug and play. And then for EGR, the manifold side is exactly the same. So what you'll do is, since you're already retaining the 3.4 manifolds, just by bolting it on. Now 99 is going to be different. So with that, you'll have to go a little different route. Even if it's as simple as just finding a setup from 2000 plus and bolting it on. these don't have the low oil sensor, and I believe the earlier models did. If you have it, just loop it to itself and you'll never have a light come on. So from there, everything else will pretty much just go on the motor. You know, just a quick glance across here. Like I said, you're changing your thermostat housing, so that'll move your overflow hose back that way. You know, your coolant hose there, we'll keep that all the same. Your hoses will fall in the same spot. You know, plugs and wires, same thing. You'll retain all your wiring. That over here with the belt drive, you know, you're gonna just take all this pretty much and put it on there. So that'll, you know, get rid of any kind of question. Throttle cable, this is a different shape than what the LX5 takes. So he just drilled a little bit on the LX5 throttle body just to get the ball to sit in there. Here's a MilzyMotorsports adapter. So, I mean, if you can get a hold of one of these, same idea, it helps you retain the bracket. This TCE uses the same bolting pattern as Factor 3.4. So, depending on which way you go is how you're gonna adapt, but it's all doable. Before I go ahead and yank this all the way out, I went through and did as little as possible to make it as easy as possible to do the switch when it comes to the motor itself. And we'll just kind of work our way around, and I'll kind of notate little things as we go. Starting with the belt drive, get your belt off, get the alternator and the bracket all off because you're going to need that for the 3.5. Undo the AC compressor and let it hang, and undo your motor mount. So when you undo your motor mount, put a piece of wood on your jack under the oil pan, put pressure on it, undo it, and you can let it down and just let it rest. It's not going to go anywhere because of the other mounts on the transmission. Upper intake came off, which helped us get the injectors and the rail off. And as you see, we kind of just lay it aside, okay, so that when you put the 3.5 in, you can just lay that back down. Coil packs, map sensor, EGR, which you can still see here. Undo all that to get your intake manifold off. At this point, you've already taken your plug wires off to go with the coil packs. Undo both coolant lines on the front here. You'll have to undo both this coolant line going to your heater core and the big black tube that wraps around. Note that there will be two little hoses going into your throttle body. You get this tube off, that'll allow this injector rail to kind of fall back even more. You'll also need to take off your crossover pipe, so the one that goes between the two manifolds. That'll also allow you to get stuff out of the way. Leave your manifolds for now. You'll need to reuse them for the 3.5. I suggest doing it when this is outside. You're gonna make sure your downpipe is dropped here. It's two 15 millimeters and they are quite a pain. Soak them for a day or so. If you have a small hand torch, heat them bad boys up. Best bet is to go under the car, just under the rack with some extensions. Then we're gonna go underneath. We're gonna go ahead and drop your starter and get to your flywheel. If you still have the inspection cover, it'll be right here. Get that off too. Take off the 3 bolts to the torque converter. They're 18 millimeter. You'll have to take a breaker bar and spin the motor with the teeth on the flex plate to get each bolt around to where you need it. Once you have all of that done, all the wiring out of the way, the vacuum lines out of the way, you should pretty much look like this. Undo your engine to transmission bolts. Now there are 5 altogether, starting in the back underneath this manifold, coming in this direction. Okay, they're all 18 millimeter, so you'll need an extension and have to reach up under there to get to that one. You'll have one right here that has a ground pack on it. 15 millimeter will get the first nut off, then your 18 to get the actual bolt out. Here, and right underneath the thermostat housing right here are just 2 regular bolts. And then you're gonna come to the other headache one. What I found is the easiest way, and I haven't finished this yet, but I'm going to. I took off the front trans mount as one whole unit, like this. 3 18s from the bottom under the subframe, 2 18s going into the trans, drop it down at the bottom. Then what you're gonna have to do is take this shroud off and take this, just this fan out if you want, or if you want, undo the wiring on this. There's a screw to hold the AC line here, and the whole fan system will pop out, and come up out of there. So you can do either way, but the reason you got to do that is they hide the last bolt behind where the transmission mount goes. There's a 15 also on top of that with a ground pack, so you'll have to kind of inch that off. Then you're gonna have to get an open-end wrench on that 18 to get that final bolt out. And one last thing I do like to forget, now that we have the motor out, is the diff bracket. And I've mentioned it a couple times now. So it's 15 millimeters. There's 2 going into the back of the block and 1 going into the oil pan. So as you see, we have that out. It's set aside, ready to go. Like I said, now is a good time to get your manifolds off here to swap onto your 3.5. My advice is just get a good system going. That way you know you catch everything. Take your time. If you need to make notes, make notes. Make sure you set the right stuff aside so that when you're ready to assemble the 3.5, you have all the things you need. We're gonna end this one right here because there's just so much information. And the next one will be us putting the 3.5 together, how you guys will see, installing, and doing the final touches of getting this thing running. Kind of figured this was gonna happen, and it's not the first time we've had to do this, but I like to be as detailed as I can. And here we are. So watch for the next one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.